Last few days. Did he give any impression that he thought his life was in danger?
Funny you should ask that, sir. The day before the murder, he seemed quite jittery. I remember when he asked me to raise the drawbridge last night, he said he always felt safer when it was up. He must have been nervous. He cut himself shaving.
I'm glad you confirmed that. I intended to ask you why he had that sticking plaster on his chin.
What's all that commotion? I think they're yelling something about a bicycle. It sounds as if they've found a bicycle hidden in the woods. Come on, quickly, let's go.
Only a spanner and oil can. Look at the mud on this bike. It's come a long way.
We must track down the owner. Whoever left it here must be the killer.
I rather think not, Inspector. Come, Watson, you and I can spend our time more profitably talking with Ames back at the house. Could you pass that dumbbell to me, please, Ames?
It's quite heavy, sir.
Quite so, Ames, quite so. Was your master in the habit of exercising with only one dumbbell? Where is the mate to this one?
I don't know, sir. I've not seen it.
Can you account for these?
No, sir. This room was thoroughly cleaned yesterday. Mrs. Allen would make certain of that. They must have been left
By the murderer, of course. The room was lit only by the candle John Douglas was carrying. The murderer hid in the corner, leaving those footprints. When he was surprised by Douglas, he shot him and escaped through that window. Don't you agree, Holmes?
No, I don't. If he performed as you have suggested, he would have killed with the noisiest of weapons when quiet was his best defense against discovery. Having roused the whole household, he must have stopped to remove the wedding ring from his victim's finger. Then he left his calling card, VV341, and putting down his gun, he took instead a dumbbell. After that, he made his escape, leaving his bicycle behind where it could be easily discovered and its owner traced.
Too much against the balance of probability, eh, Holmes?
Exactly, Watson. I wonder if I might talk with Mrs. Allen. She may know more of this mystery than she is aware. When I've spoken to her, I'd like a few words with Mrs. Douglas. Spare the ladies the unpleasant memories of this study. Perhaps you could ask them to join me in the library.
As you wish, sir.
Come in. Come in.
Come in, Mrs. Allen.
I'm sorry I didn't hear you answer. I'm afraid I'm a little deaf.
A common enough affliction.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Allen. Because your bedroom is close to the study, I was hopeful you may have heard something last night.
I was in my room getting ready for bed when I heard Mr. Ames running past my door, shouting that something had happened. So I followed him. As a matter of fact, I didn't actually hear a shot. Funny, because my deafness is not too bad. It's funny, too, because I did hear a door slam about half an hour before that.
What happened next?
When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw Mr. Barker coming out of the study. He was obviously very shaken. He shouted that the master had been shot dead. He told me to take Mrs. Douglas to her room and stay with her.
How did Mrs. Douglas take the news? Did she try to go to her husband?
No, sir. She turned on her heel and went straight back up the stairs. I stayed with her all night. She just sat with her head in her hands. I thought she took it quite well.
Thank you, Mrs. Allen. You've been very helpful. You may go. In the unlikely event that I should ever marry, I should hope to inspire in my wife some feeling which would prevent her from being walked off by a housekeeper when my corpse was lying just a few feet away.
Are you suggesting that in some way Mrs. Douglas is implicated in the murder of her own husband?
Tell me, Mrs. Douglas, what precisely were you doing when the alarm was given?
I was getting ready for bed when I heard the shot. I ran at once to the study.
Can you give us any idea of how long your husband had been downstairs before you heard the shot?
No, I cannot say for sure. He always did the rounds of the house before going to bed. He was very nervous of fire.
You've known your husband only in England, have you not?
Yes, he's lived here for 10 years. We married 5 years ago.
Have you ever heard him speak of anything which occurred in America and might bring some danger to him?
Can a husband ever carry a secret with him all his life without the woman who loves him suspecting it? I knew because of his refusal to talk about some episodes in his American life. I knew it by certain precautions he took. I knew it by certain words he let fall. I knew it by the way he looked at unexpected strangers. He was always on his guard. But most of all, I knew it because one day he said to me, "Are we never to get out of the valley of fear?"
You told us that when you entered the room, there was only a lighted candle on the table.
Yes, that is so.
You at once rang for help,
I did,
and it arrived speedily.
within a minute.
Yet, when help arrived, the candle was out and the lamp had been lit.
The candle threw a very bad light. The lamp was on the table, so I lit it.
Well, what do you make of it, Watson?
I don't believe that fellow Barker. And I wonder if there is not some sort of conspiracy between he and Mrs. Douglas.
A lie, Watson, a great, big, thumping, obtrusive, uncompromising lie. That's what meets us. The whole story told by Barker is a lie, but the Barker story is corroborated by Mrs. Douglas. Therefore, she is also lying.
How do you actually know they are lying?
That's elementary, my dear Watson, elementary. Ames didn't hear the shot. You remember that he was in the pantry and was summoned to the study by the bell. Mrs. Allen didn't hear the shot because she's a little deaf, although she says she was alerted by the noise made by Ames as he hurried past her bedroom door. Only Mrs. Douglas and Barker say they heard the shot. Sergeant Wilson told us that Douglas was well known for his bravery. Would a brave man hand over his wedding ring? I think not. The fact that so little of the candle had been burned shows there was no lengthy discussion between Douglas and his murderer. There was no time for the assassin to remove the wedding ring after the shot. Ask yourself, Watson, would a murderer choose the noisiest weapon available, run the risk of rousing the household, then remove the wedding ring and replace the nugget ring that was with it? Of course he wouldn't. The assassin must have spent some time alone with his victim, and that must have been after the lamp was lit. Would you bring me your umbrella, Watson, and then leave me to read and think? There's one further matter which I must yet resolve.
An umbrella, Holmes? And what is this further matter?
Whatever happened to the missing dumbbell? discover the owner of the bicycle?
We did indeed. A man named Hargrave registered 2 days ago at the Commercial Hotel in Tunbridge Wells. The day after he arrived, he left on his bicycle and hasn't been seen since.
Obviously, he's our man. The timing is perfect. He committed the murder, then ran for it.
Leaving his bicycle where he was bound to be discovered quickly, and not checking out of the hotel, the manager would surely report the sudden disappearance of a guest to the police.
Well, we'll have him soon enough anyway. His description has gone out on the wire, and he,
What did he look like?
Well, I don't seem to have taken any particular stock of him, but the porter, the clerk, and the chambermaid are all agreed that he is 5 feet 9 inches tall, about 50 years old, hair grizzled, moustache grey, nose curved, a general appearance, fierce facial expression, and he is an American.
Well, aside from the fierce face, you might have described Douglas himself. You recall that Sergeant Wilson said Douglas was...
Exactly as the inspector just said. About 5 foot 9 inches tall, well-built, with grey-brown hair and a moustache. And he talked with an American accent.
Did you get anything else?
Only that he was dressed in a heavy grey suit with a reefer jacket, and he wore a short yellow overcoat and soft cap.
It is our opinion that Hargrave left his hotel yesterday morning and rode here with the gun hidden under his overcoat. He probably watched and waited all day for an opportunity to get into the house and shoot Douglas. We conclude that he hid behind the curtain in the study, and when Douglas entered, he shot him and escaped.
Well, what do you think of our theory, Mr. Holmes?
Well, it's very good and clear as far as it goes. I say that the crime was committed half an hour earlier than we have been told, and that Mrs. Douglas and Barker are both in a conspiracy to conceal something, and they aided the murderer's escape.
If your theory is right, Mr. Holmes, then we must exchange one mystery for another.
And in some respects, a worse one. Mrs. Douglas has never been to America. Why should she want to protect the American assassin of her husband? I propose to spend the evening in the murder room reading, and I might even go fishing. I'll see you gentlemen in the morning.
Was your evening successful, Mr. Holmes?
Did you catch any fish?
In a manner of speaking, yes. I spent a very pleasant and informative evening reading about this fine old house. Let me give you an example. Erected in the 5th year of the reign of James I, the manor house of Burlston presents one of the finest surviving examples of the moated Jacobean residence.
You are making fools of us, Mr. Holmes.
Do calm yourself, Inspector. I'm sure he has a reason. Haven't you, Holmes?
Indeed I have. Are you aware, gentlemen, that this house was taken in 1644 in the course of our Civil War, and that Charles the King was concealed here for several days, and also that George II stayed here?
And what's that got to do with us?
Breadth of view, my dear Mr. Mack, is one of the essentials of our profession. But I'll drop history and get down to present-day facts. You'll be pleased to learn that Mrs. Douglas is not pining for her husband. I am told by the good Ames that she ate an excellent dinner last night. During my evening in the study, I decided to ask you to issue an order to drain the moat.
Drain the moat? I don't know if it's possible.
Get some paper, Watson, and I'll dictate a note to Mrs. Douglas. It has struck me that it is our duty to drain the moat in the hope that we may find something which may bear upon our investigation. I have made arrangements for the workmen to start diverting the stream tomorrow morning. I thought it best to explain matters beforehand. Deliver that note to Mrs. Douglas at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And at sunset, let us meet behind the laurel bushes on the bank opposite the study. In the meantime, I suggest you go for a stroll. This inquiry has come to a definite pause.
I saw something you should know about. Before dinner yesterday, I came across Mrs. Douglas and Barker laughing and joking together in the garden. Well, what do you make of that?
I thought a lot about the relationship of Mrs. Douglas and Barker. Tonight, I expect to solve the mystery.